Have you ever thought about what it would really mean to be invisible? Like, not just hiding in the shadows, but actually becoming unseen. I mean, it's pure fantasy, right?
It sounds like something straight out of a movie.
Yeah, but that's what we're looking at today. We're going deep into a book called, get this, The Invisible Fist: Secret Ninja Methods of Vanishing Without a Trace.
Okay, now that's a title that grabs your attention.
Right. And it promises some pretty wild techniques, stuff that makes you wonder if maybe, just maybe, there's something more to this whole invisibility thing.
I'm intrigued already.
Me too. And for everyone listening, think about it, whether it's self-defense, maybe getting a little edge in a tough spot, or just plain curiosity about the impossible. This is going to be a wild ride.
So we're talking about actual invisibility.
Well, not exactly. We're diving into excerpts from this book, written back in 1998 by a guy named Ashida. It's all about the art of invisibility as it's understood in ninjutsu. But don't worry, we're not going to try and convince you of any magic.
Good, because I was a little worried there.
Instead, we're going to unpack the principles behind these methods, like how do they work? How do they play on human perception, maybe even our physiology? That's our mission today.
Sounds fascinating. Where do we even begin with something like this?
Well, the book starts off by saying that true invisibility isn't just about not being seen.
Okay, so what is it about then?
It's about this idea of hitting without being hit, and even better, completely avoiding confrontation. It's about preventing things from happening in the first place.
That's interesting. So it's more strategic, less about hiding in the bushes.
Exactly. The book says you cannot block or hit what you cannot see. And that attacks can come from anywhere. You have to be ready.
So how do you prepare for that? How do you see what you can't see?
That's where it gets fascinating. It brings up the Black Dragon Tong of Retribution, this historical group shrouded in mystery. They were all about being humble, staying out of the way.
Sounds peaceful enough.
They were, but they were also incredibly dangerous if you pushed them too far.
So, peaceful, but with a hidden edge.
Yeah. The book calls it the power to kill and walk away. They could defend themselves with deadly force, but they wouldn't brag about it, wouldn't even take credit. Their whole philosophy was about minimizing their presence, making themselves almost invisible, both physically and in terms of their reputation.
I see. So this idea of invisibility isn't just about literal disappearance. It's about a way of being in the world.
Right. And it makes you think about self-defense. What about people who aren't strong or don't have weapons? Can they still be safe?
That's a good question. A lot of martial arts are about using force against force.
Yeah, but the book argues that relying on force or weapons can actually backfire.
How so?
Well, what if your weapon is taken from you, or your attacker is just stronger? The book says that all warfare is a matter of will.
So it's about mental strength.
Exactly. It's about being mentally prepared, having that inner strength to overcome any obstacle.
That's a powerful idea. But is that really possible? Can you really defeat someone without any physical contact?
The book makes some pretty bold claims about certain martial arts that supposedly allow for that.
Really? Like what?
Well, it doesn't go into specifics, but it mentions techniques that can influence an opponent's balance, their perception, even their psychological state. It's about creating an illusion, making yourself seem more powerful than you actually are.
Okay, I'm starting to understand. It's about playing with your opponent's mind, making them hesitate, doubt themselves.
You got it. It's about using strategy and cunning rather than brute force. It's about being a phantom, unpredictable, and elusive.
And how does the book suggest you learn these techniques?
Well, it gets pretty interesting here. It brings up this ancient school called the Pole Star School, supposedly from like 6000 BC.
Wow, that's going way back.
I know, right? And they supposedly had these incredible techniques for vanishing, but they kept them secret, hidden away in something called the secret doctrine.
A secret doctrine. That sounds serious.
It was. They believed that you had to master the basics, exhaust all other methods before you were even ready to learn the real deal.
So it's not just about learning the moves. It's about a change in mindset, a willingness to believe in something beyond the ordinary.
Exactly. And that's where ninjutsu comes in, the silent way, as they call it.
And these techniques for vanishing, are they, actually real?
That's the big question, isn't it?
It is. Are we talking about stage magic or something else entirely?
Well, the book says that some of the techniques are actually used by stage magicians, creating illusions of disappearance.
Okay, that makes sense. But I'm guessing there's more to it than that.
There is. It talks about the 9 methods of the Black Dragon School, drawing on ancient Chinese philosophy and medicine.
The I Ching and the 5 elements.
You know your stuff.
Well, I've done some research on this topic,
Mm.
and I know those concepts play a huge role in a lot of martial arts.
Right, and it even mentions other groups throughout history who were fascinated by invisibility, like the Rosicrucians and the Gnostics. They had all sorts of ideas, from rearranging their physical form to literally bending light with their minds.
It's fascinating how this concept of invisibility appears in so many different cultures.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a universal human desire to disappear, to become untouchable.
I think you're right, but the book brings it back down to earth, focusing on this dragon method of clouding men's minds. It's about using psychology, misdirection, and exploiting how people perceive the world.
So less about actual invisibility and more about manipulating how people see you.
Exactly. It's about creating distractions, exploiting blind spots, and using your environment to your advantage.
That makes sense. It's about using your brain, not just your muscles.
And it's not just about hiding or ambushing people. It's about disappearing right in front of their eyes.
Okay, now I'm really curious. How does that even work?
Well, this is where we get into the 5 elements of invisibility: camouflage, concealment, cover, appearing, and vanishing.
5 elements. I thought we were just talking about invisibility.
We are, but the book ties these 5 elements to the 5 elements of Chinese medicine: earth, water, fire, air, and wood.
So like a framework for understanding different aspects of invisibility.
Exactly. And each element is represented by a finger on your hand, making it easy to remember.
Okay, I'm following so far.
So, earth is about grounding yourself, blending in with your surroundings. Water is about fluidity, adapting to any situation. Fire is about energy, using distractions and misdirection. Air is about mental influence, controlling how people perceive you. And wood is about harmony, mastering all the elements and achieving true invisibility.
Wow, that's quite a system. But how do these elements actually translate into practical techniques?
That's what we're going to explore. The book delves into each element, providing specific methods and exercises for developing these skills. It gets pretty detailed.
I'm ready to dive in. Let's start with Earth.
Okay, the Book of Earth focuses on blinding techniques, starting with the most basic one.
Let me guess. Throwing dirt in someone's eyes.
Bingo! The book calls it an ancient self-defense tactic, reframing it from a dirty trick to a necessary act of self-preservation.
I can see that. When you're in a desperate situation, anything goes.
Right. The book points out that even a handful of sand is difficult to deflect, and it can give you that crucial moment to escape. And it calls this the starting point of the art of invisibility.
So even a simple act like that can be a powerful tool for disappearing.
Exactly. It's about creating chaos, confusion, a momentary break in the attacker's focus, and in that moment, you vanish.
Okay, I'm starting to get it. But what about something a little more sophisticated than throwing dirt?
Well, the book describes these things called black eggs, or Hai Lan. They're like little containers for blinding powder.
Black eggs. What are those made of?
Basically, they were hollowed-out eggshells filled with all sorts of nasty stuff. Ash, bone chips, salt, pepper, even metal filings.
Ouch. That sounds unpleasant.
It was meant to be, and they were fragile, so you could easily crush them in your hand and throw the powder.
Like a little grenade.
Kind of, but without the explosion. The book says that some people mistook these for exploding grenades, leading to the myth of ninja explosive.
So it's all about creating a diversion, a cloud of blinding powder to obscure your escape.
Exactly, and they had all sorts of ways to deliver this powder. They could throw it against a wall to create a curtain of dust, or use a technique called the palm blow.
What's the palm blow?
It involves concealing powder in your palm, distracting your opponent, and then blowing it forcefully into their eyes with a burst of air.
That sounds pretty effective, blinding and startling them at the same time.
Exactly, and they even had these squeeze bottles for projecting the powder at a distance.
So they weren't limited to close-range attacks.
Nope. They were pretty ingenious when it came to these blinding techniques. They even had this thing called the Black Ninja Method.
What was that?
Well, it was made famous by a wrestler named Kendo Nagasaki. He called it the Earth Method Dragon Breath. And it involved propelling this dry green powder from his mouth like a dragon breathing fire.
I've actually seen that before. That's pretty intimidating.
It is. The book suggests that they might have used a bamboo pipe filled with powder to create that effect.
Makes sense. Bamboo is lightweight and easy to conceal.
Right, so you can see they put a lot of thought into these techniques.
They did. It's about being resourceful, using whatever you have at your disposal to create an advantage.
And it's not just about the tools, it's about the skill. The book stresses the importance of accuracy, saying that even a penny can be deadly if thrown properly.
So it's about precision and control.
Absolutely. And that's where the exercise of stillness comes in. It's about cultivating that inner peace and focus that allows you to act with precision and speed.
Okay, let's talk about that. What does this exercise involve?
It starts with a technique called Kuji Kiri, which is a series of hand gestures and breathing exercises used to focus energy and calm the mind.
Like a kind of meditation.
Exactly. It's about connecting your body and breath, finding that center of stillness within yourself.
That sounds very zen.
It is. The book describes it as kindling the fire in your tantien, the energy center in your lower abdomen.
The tantien is a key concept in a lot of martial arts. It's about cultivating your internal energy, or ki.
Right. And through Kuji Kiri and deep breathing exercises, you can strengthen your chi and achieve a state of calmness and focus that will help you in any situation, not just combat.
So it's not just about fighting, it's about mastering yourself.
You got it. And the book even talks about using this calmness to overcome fear. It says that when you're afraid, your breathing becomes rapid and shallow, which makes you panic.
Yeah, that's the fight or flight response kicking in.
Exactly. But if you can control your breath, you can control your fear. The book recommends taking a deep belly breath, exhaling slightly, and tightening your belly when you feel afraid. It's like a physical anchor that helps you stay grounded.
I can see how that would be helpful. It's like taking a moment to collect yourself before reacting.
And then it gives this little trick for dealing with an attacker. It says to look them dead in the eyes, actually. Focus on their forehead, just above their eyes.
Why the forehead?
The book says it makes them feel inferior, throws them off balance, and then as soon as you finish inhaling and tightening your belly, blow out forcefully into their face.
That's a pretty sneaky tactic.
It is, and it doesn't have to be a huge gust of wind. Even a short puff of air can make someone blink, giving you a chance to escape.
It's all about creating that momentary distraction.
Precisely. And the book recommends practicing this by blowing out a candle from a distance. Start at arm's length, then move further and further back.
Okay, I can try that. Sounds like a fun exercise.
It is. It helps you develop that precise breath control that you need for all sorts of ninja techniques.
So we've covered blinding techniques and breath control. What else is in the Book of Earth?
Well, it ends with a brief overview of the stone dragon technique, which is all about grounded fighting using linear attacks and takedowns.
So a more direct approach compared to the subtle techniques we've been discussing.
Yeah. It's about understanding anatomy, knowing where to strike for maximum impact, and it's part of this whole ninja iron body system where they supposedly toughened their bodies to withstand blows.
Okay, that makes sense. You need to be able to defend yourself if all else fails.
Right. But the book doesn't go into too much detail on this technique. It's more focused on the elusive, disappearing aspects of ninjutsu.
Fair enough. I think I'm ready to move on to the next element.
All right, let's flow into the Book of Water.
The water dragon. I'm curious to see where this goes.
Well, the book says that the water dragon resides in the pool of the subconscious mind. It's all about adaptability, using fluidity and deception to your advantage.
So it's less about brute force and more about outsmarting your opponent.
Exactly. The book talks about using liquids as weapons, things like poison sprays, and even just plain old spit.
Spit? Really?
Yep. It might seem silly, but a well-aimed loogie can temporarily blind someone, giving you a chance to get away.
I suppose that's true. It's about using whatever you have at your disposal.
And it gets pretty weird. It describes this exercise for producing saliva called the juice of jade.
Juice of jade. That sounds pretty poetic for spit.
It does, right? It involves rotating your tongue and swishing it around in your mouth, supposedly 72 times.
72 times? That seems awfully specific.
It is. The book says that this number has symbolic significance, representing the unification of heaven, earth, and man.
So even something as simple as spitting has a deeper meaning in ninjutsu.
Right. It's all about connecting your mind, body, and spirit. And speaking of weird techniques, it even mentions using tobacco juice.
As in chewing tobacco.
Yep. It references Clint Eastwood in The Outlaw Josie Wales, spitting tobacco juice to blind his enemies.
Well, I guess it would be pretty effective if a bit disgusting.
It definitely wouldn't win any points for style, but the book makes it clear that they're not advocating for tobacco use, just pointing out that it's something that has been used in combat.
Makes sense. And then there's this thing called acid breath.
Oh yeah, that one's a classic. It was made famous by the wrestler Killer Khan, who used to spew this green liquid at his opponents.
I remember that. It was pretty gross.
It was. The book says that ninjas would use a chalk-like tablet coated in wax to stimulate saliva production, and they'd add pigments to create different colors.
So it was more of a visual distraction than a real acid attack.
Right, but they warn against using anything too caustic because you could accidentally swallow it and hurt yourself.
Good point. You don't want to be your own worst enemy.
Exactly. And then it gets even weirder. The book describes a technique called the art of regurgitation.
As in, throwing up on command.
You got it. It's supposedly a technique that comes from extreme stress, but they train to do it voluntarily.
Why on earth would they want to do that?
Well, they'd use it to conceal things, like weapons or tools. The book even says that Houdini learned how to do it from a Chinese man so he could hide lockpicks and other escape tools.
Wow, that's taken it to a whole new level.
It is. It's about pushing the boundaries of what your body can do, gaining control over those involuntary reflexes.
I think I'll stick with the blinding powder for now.
Probably a wise choice. But there's one more water technique that I want to talk about. The poison water gun.
Okay, that sounds more like a real weapon.
It is. It's basically a syringe that you use to project liquids at your opponent.
What kind of liquids?
It could be anything from marsh water, which is full of bacteria, to oil, which would make it difficult to grip weapons.
I see. It's about creating an advantage however you can.
Exactly. And the book mentions some pretty scary examples, like Russian spies using syringes filled with prussic acid, and the bank robber Willie Sutton using bleach to blind guards.
Yikes. That's definitely not something you want to mess with.
No kidding. And that brings us to the first circular technique of the ninja invisible fist system, the hidden fist, or Michuan.
Circular technique. What's the significance of that?
Well, it represents the circular nature of water, that fluidity and adaptability that we were talking about, and it's all about disrupting your opponent's vision and consciousness through specific strikes.
Okay, I'm intrigued. How does it work?
The book describes a strike using the buffalo knuckle fist, where you extend your middle finger knuckle and use it to knock on the opponent's third eye.
The third eye. Isn't that a mystical concept?
It is, but in this context, it refers to the point between and slightly above the eyes. A sharp blow there can disrupt nerve impulses, causing the person to see spots or even pass out.
That makes sense. It's a very vulnerable area.
And they have this technique called the purple haze punch, where you use this buffalo knuckle fist in a circular upward strike, aiming to traumatize the nerves and cause temporary blindness.
Sounds pretty devastating.
It can be, but it's also said to be quick to learn and almost instinctive. The book emphasizes that it's not about causing permanent damage, but about creating that moment of disorientation, that brief window where you can vanish.
I understand. It's about self-defense, not brutality.
Exactly. And that brings us to our last technique in the Book of Water, Haraki.
Haraki. I thought that was ritual suicide.
Not in this context. Here, Haraki refers to using your breath and voice as a weapon. It's about drawing in that deep belly breath, tensing your core, and then releasing it with a powerful shout, or ki.
Ah, the ki. That's that loud yell that martial artists do.
You know it. The book says that a well-executed ki can freeze an opponent, startle them, even make them blink. And it's not just about the sound, it's about projecting that focused energy, that inner force that we've been cultivating through breath control.
So it's like a physical manifestation of your will.
Exactly. And it ties back to the water element because sound travels through water in waves. The book even recommends practicing this by shouting out a candle.
Shouting out a candle, how does that work?
It's about focusing your breath and your intention, aiming that burst of energy at the flame and snuffing it out. And then there's the silent ki, where you do the same thing but without making any sound.
So it's about mastering that internal force, whether it's audible or not.
Precisely. You're literally using your breath as a weapon.
Okay, that's pretty impressive. I think I'm ready to move on to the next element. What does the Book of Fire have in store for us?
Oh, this is where things get really interesting. The Book of Fire is all about, well, fire. You bet. We're talking about fire eating, fire breathing, all that good stuff. The book describes it as the ultimate yin and yang of Qigong exercises, a way to harness the power of fire and transform yourself.
Okay, now that's getting a little out there, even for me.
I know, it sounds crazy. But the book claims that these techniques are real and that they've been passed down through generations of ninjas. And it even reveals the secret of fire breathing for the first time in print, which was traditionally a closely guarded secret.
Really? That's a pretty big deal.
It is, and the book even quotes Penn Jillette, the magician, who once said, I'm not interested in how you eat fire. I'm interested in why you would want to. And the answer they give is pretty fascinating.
I'm all ears.
They say it's a public display of power, a demonstration of mental control over the autonomic nervous system. It's about pushing yourself to your limits, overcoming fear and pain, and achieving a level of self-discipline that most people can only dream of.
So it's not just a trick, it's a form of self-mastery.
Exactly, and they claim that there's no real trick to it, just concentration and understanding how fire works.
Really. So anyone can learn to eat fire.
Well, they don't say that explicitly, but they do provide detailed instructions for how to do it safely. Of course, they stress the importance of caution and practice.
I bet.
Eh,
Playing with fire is not something to take lightly.
no kidding. But they also talk about the symbolic meaning of fire eating. They say that it gives the impression that you're nourishing yourself on something beyond what mortals can handle, almost like you're tapping into some kind of supernatural power.
That makes sense. It's like you're defying the laws of nature.
Right, and they connect this to the secret of life through the cycles of respiration, digestion, and circulation. They say that fire represents energy intake and utilization, just like how we need air to breathe, water to drink, and earth to eat.
So it's about understanding how we use energy, how we transform it within our bodies.
Exactly, and they say that the reason why people attribute magic to fire eating is because it disrupts their understanding of the natural world. They see you eating something that should burn you, and it blows their minds.
I could see that. It's like a visual paradox.
And they argue that this perception of magic can actually be used to your advantage.
How so?
Well, if people think you have supernatural powers, they're more likely to be intimidated by you, more likely to back down from a confrontation.
So it's a form of psychological warfare.
Exactly. And they even talk about using subtle breath control techniques to manipulate the flame, creating the illusion that you're controlling it with your mind.
Like telekinesis.
Kind of. They call it developing the subtle breath, and it involves using a steady, long exhalation to form a protective air column around the flame.
So you're not actually controlling the flame, but you're manipulating the air around it.
Right. It's a subtle but effective technique, and it's something that you can practice with a simple candle.
Okay, so how do you actually eat fire?
Well, the book provides step-by-step instructions, starting with making these little torches out of cotton swabs and white gasoline.
White gasoline. Is that safe?
It's safer than regular gasoline, but it's still flammable, so you have to be careful. And they emphasize that you should never bring a lit torch near the fuel.
Good advice.
And then they walk you through the process of extinguishing the torch in your mouth, tilting your head back, and exhaling slowly so you don't inhale any fumes. It's a very precise technique, and they recommend practicing with an unlit torch until you're comfortable with the movements.
So it's not just about being fearless. It's about understanding the mechanics of fire and controlling your body's reactions.
Got it. And then they describe the flaming finger principle, where you can quickly pass a lit match over your skin without getting burned because the contact time is so short.
That's a neat trick.
It is. And they connect this to a traditional Chinese therapy called moxibustion, where they burn dried mugworts near the skin for healing purposes.
So it's not magic, it's science.
Exactly. But even though it's based on scientific principles, it still has that element of danger and spectacle that makes it so captivating.
Okay, I'm ready for the grand finale. Tell me about fire breathing.
All right, here we go. The book calls it Fire-Breathing Dragon, the most spectacular demonstration of the fire principle and the symbol of the Black Dragon School.
Sounds intense.
It is. It's basically what it sounds like, spewing a stream of fire from your mouth. But it's incredibly dangerous.
I can imagine.
They warn that if you don't expel the fuel completely, you could end up setting yourself on fire. It's not something to be attempted lightly.
No kidding. So how do you do it?
Well, they give pretty detailed instructions, but I'm not going to repeat them here because it's just too risky.
Understandable.
But the basic idea is that you take a mouthful of fuel, usually white gas again, and then forcefully expel it over an open flame, creating a jet of fire. And they emphasize that you should never swallow the fuel.
That seems like a pretty important detail.
Yeah, I would say so. And they even tell a story of someone who tried fire breathing without enough practice and ended up with severe burns. It's a cautionary tale that highlights the importance of respecting the power of fire.
I'm starting to think that the invisible part of this technique might refer to the person disappearing into a cloud of smoke after they accidentally ignite themselves.
That's a good point. But the book also talks about dragon invisibility as something beyond fire breathing. It's about cultivating that inner strength, that dragon energy that allows you to control your own body and influence the world around you.
So it's about more than just physical techniques. It's about a state of being.
Exactly. It's about that mental discipline, that mastery of your emotions and your fear that allows you to face any challenge and emerge victorious.
Okay, that's starting to sound more like the philosophical invisibility we were talking about earlier.
Right. And the book stresses that this level of mastery is not for everyone, but everyone can benefit from learning the basics and developing their own inner dragon.
I like that. It's about finding your own path to power and invisibility.
Exactly. And that brings us to the Book of Air, the realm of the mind.
The clouding men's minds element.
Yeah,
Like,
you got it. This is where things get really interesting because we're moving beyond physical techniques and into the realm of mental influence and illusion.
okay, I'm ready to have my mind blown. What kind of techniques are we talking about?
Well, it starts with a pretty strange one. It's called the breath weapon, and it involves, well, using your breath to create a really foul odor.
Wait, what? Like bad breath?
Not exactly. It's more about consciously cultivating a putrid odor in your bowels and then releasing it with a well-timed belch.
Okay, that's pretty disgusting. Are you serious?
I know it sounds crazy, but the book claims that it's a real technique, and it even tells a story of a martial arts master who could knock people out with his halitosis.
You're kidding me?
Nope. Apparently, he'd let out this huge belch, and the stench would be so overwhelming that people would literally pass out.
Wow, I guess you don't need a black belt when you've got a weapon like that.
Right, it's like a biological weapon. And the book even gives some advice on how to develop this technique.
Oh no, please don't tell me they actually explain how to make yourself smell that bad.
Well, they do mention this ancient Chinese technique called swallowing air, which is supposed to help you expel noxious stomach gases.
So they're not just making this stuff up.
Nope. And they even suggest practicing your belching technique with carbonated drinks, get those burps nice and loud.
Okay, I think I'll pass on that one.
Probably a wise choice. But the book also mentions that this technique has been used throughout history, not just by ninjas. Like, gladiators in ancient Rome would supposedly eat rotten food and drink stagnant water to give themselves terrible body odor, hoping to make their opponents gag and lose their focus.
Ugh, it's pretty nasty. But I guess it would be effective in a brutal hand-to-hand combat situation.
Right. It's all about psychological warfare, using any advantage you can get. And the book stresses that even if you don't want to cultivate a truly foul odor, practicing your belching technique is important because it's needed for other, less smelly techniques later on.
Okay, I'll take your word for it. So what's next in the Book of Air?
Well, it moves on to something called the silent ki.
I thought we already talked about the ki. Isn't that the loud shout?
Right, but the silent ki is all about expelling a ball of air from your abdomen with your mouth open, but without making any sound. It's like a gas attack.